341, Taking a Day Off. Sorry everyone, I'm really too busy today. Recent chapters need more polishing, so Xiao Di has to take a day off. Sorry. I want to present a different Goblet of Fire, a different story, but that takes time. Rushing a chapter would be disrespectful and feel perfunctory and dishonest. I hope you all understand. To be honest, I've already written about 4,000 words that could be published, but it's too rushed. Publishing unpolished chapters would be like being a hair off and missing the mark entirely. Sorry. Chapter 342, Holding Hands, Instructions to Hermione. On the second floor of the castle, a quiet, rather long corridor ran between Madame Pomfrey's office and the moving staircases. Midday sunlight slipped through the leaded windows, throwing patterns of light and shadow along the stone floor. Eno stood by the entrance to the infirmary, idly watching the corridor. At the far end, he spotted Hermione and Ginny walking side by side. The sight made his chest stir a little. Harry could be stoic and unlucky in turns, but he also had his fortunate moments. People like Ginny, who gave steady, unwavering care, were part of that luck. Hermione and Ginny saw him too. Hermione's face brightened. "Eno," she called, the surprise in her voice ringing clear in the corridor. Her steps quickened a little. "You're here to see Harry too? I'm bringing Ginny. She looks a bit off, and I'm worried." As she approached, she explained in a low voice, glancing back as if to check Ginny's agreement. Hermione hadn't expected to run into Eno here. She'd planned to send Ginny into the infirmary and then congratulate her privately. It was a pleasant surprise, but also something that needed sorting out. "As a friend, you're right to come. She does look unwell," Eno said, seeing through her thoughts and waving it away. Ginny caught up, breathless at the infirmary entrance. "Good morning, Mr. Swinburne," she said politely despite her worry. "Just Eno," he replied easily. He knew the Weasley twins well enough, but he hadn't had much to do with Ginny aside from the notebook incident in their second year. He hadn't spoken to her alone often. "If you want to see Harry, now's the time. He's asleep at the moment. But if too many people come later, Madame Pomfrey may limit visitors. Don't worry, he's not seriously hurt." Eno admired Ginny's steady determination. It was disarming. Perhaps his admiration showed. The moment he finished speaking, he felt a small kick from Hermione. She was pretending not to look, staring at the ceiling, and Ginny chuckled, covering her mouth. Ginny's worry eased a little when she heard Harry was not badly injured, but she still went in. Hermione gave her an encouraging look as Ginny pushed open the door. When the door shut, the corridor fell quiet again. After a beat, Hermione asked, "Is he really all right?" "For now," Eno nodded. "By the way, I haven't congratulated you yet. A perfect score is well deserved." Hermione tilted her head, earnest. Since sharing the room of requirement secret, something between them had shifted. She no longer blushed so easily, and now met him openly. "Thank you," she said, "but it was only a game." Eno smiled and met her eyes. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another until the quiet was broken by the soft click of the infirmary door opening again. Both turned toward the sound. Professor Snape stood in the doorway in his black robes, awkward and uncertain, neither coming in nor going back. Hermione's surprise flickered into gratitude. If not for the two-way mirror and for the discovery of that bottle of Felix Felicis in potions, events might have unfolded very differently. In hindsight, she could see a thread linking various odd occurrences, and that thread ran back to the potion master in front of her. To spare him embarrassment, Hermione greeted him briskly. Then, almost instinctively, she stepped in and took Eno by the arm, steering him down the corridor away from the infirmary. Eno was a little surprised by the sudden tug. He hadn't even spoken to Snape. Snape watched them leave, expression unreadable as they moved along. Even after they had passed the infirmary entrance, Hermione didn't let go. She kept her hand where it was and matched his pace. Eno tightened his grip slightly, and what had begun as a passive handhold became a deliberate side-by-side walk. It felt natural, as if the change had begun the moment he accepted Hermione's Felix Felicis. Sometimes relationships began the instant a debt was owed. Hermione smiled at the warmth in his palm. They walked slowly in step, the corridor stretching before them. After a while, Eno spoke. "For the next little while, try not to get close to Harry." Because of the unforgivable curses? Hermione looked up in surprise. then hesitated. Can dark arts really do something that severe with just one use? No. He shook his head. There's more to it. He paused, weighing how much to say. He decided she should know enough to be careful, but that it should stay between them. Hermione, there's something you ought to know, but it's best if only you hear it. He stopped and spoke more gravely. Harry has changed a bit. It isn't him exactly. Think of it like a dark arts curse. He's become unpredictable. In a few careful sentences, he explained the seriousness of the situation, outlining Harry's erratic behavior and the danger it posed, while avoiding certain names and the words Horcrux and Voldemort. He wanted her to understand how risky it might be to approach him. Oh my goodness. Hermione's eyes widened. She'd thought it was only an emergency reaction. She hadn't expected such depth. Then, panic flickering across her features, she remembered Ginny. "Ginny's still inside," she snapped, turning her head toward the infirmary. Snape had been there when Ginny and Harry were left alone. "It's not that bad," Eno said, pulling her back gently. "And Madame Pomfrey's given him a sleeping draught. He won't wake for some time." Hermione's stride slowed. "Does Dumbledore know? Has he found any way to?" Her voice trailed off, uncertain. 343. Lock on the target with the help of the crown crowning. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Eno didn't know what to say. To be honest, given the present circumstances, he had no idea what the old headmaster was thinking. One thing, however, seemed certain. Dumbledore had likely made a serious mistake. In front of all the teachers and students of Hogwarts, and before the visiting delegations from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, he had openly used an unforgivable curse. That was no small matter, for England, for Hogwarts, and even for Harry. Rumor could elevate someone to godhood or plunge them into ruin. Faced with Hermione's question, Eno paused, then decided to reassure her. "Professor Dumbledore knows the situation, so he must have a way to handle it. This is bigger than we can fix right now, but you should carry Corvus's feather with you every day. Don't hesitate to use it if you need to." Hermione's expression softened. When he mentioned Corvus's feather, she paused for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll carry it with me at all times." Her brief moment of blankness didn't escape Eno's notice. He was about to mutter that phoenix feathers were consumable, not irreplaceable, when their conversation was cut off. A crowd had appeared at the end of the corridor. Ron, Neville, Seamus, Colin, George, Fred, everyone seemed to be coming to see Harry. Hermione instinctively wanted to withdraw the hand she'd been holding, but the hand holding hers tightened. The second-floor corridor was long and unobstructed, so the Gryffindor group could see what was happening ahead. George was the first to notice and made an exaggerated "wow" before taking Fred's hand. The twins' instincts were uncannily in sync. They strode to the front together, clasped hands, and waved as if making an announcement. Hermione, who had been relaxed and open moments before, lowered her head and blushed at the twins' showmanship. "Hello, everyone." Eno greeted them naturally. He had nothing to be embarrassed about. "Ginny's in there too, but I recommend going in small groups. Otherwise, I'm afraid Madame Pomfrey will chase you out." Fred jumped in at once. "Let little Ron and his classmates go in first. I just remembered." George suddenly waved his hand and grinned. "You lot probably need specially made straw rings." While the twins bantered, Colin hung back, silent. He neither followed Ron into the wardroom nor pushed forward like Fred and George to chat. He checked the camera strapped to his chest, then glanced at Eno and at Hermione's hand in Eno's. After a moment when the twins' conversation lulled, Colin found the courage to speak. "Excuse me, Mr. Swinburne, may I take your picture?" Colin had been doing more work with the Daily Prophet lately and had learned the basics. Except for exceptional circumstances, photographers should ask for permission. Eno smiled at the request. Of course, the most professional reporter in the castle. The little joke narrowed the distance between them. Eno stood still while Colin fussed with his camera. He had a soft spot for unsung heroes. At the end of many stories, sacrifices were remembered. Fred, Moody, Sirius. But few ever remembered the Muggle-born boy who had just turned 15, Colin Creevey. Perhaps only Colin's younger brother, Dennis, kept his memory alive. The shutter clicked, and Colin's face lit up. "Thanks. Some of these photos I might send to the Daily Prophet." His voice trailed off, as if asking for permission. "Go ahead. There's nothing to hide," Eno said, glancing at Hermione for her opinion. She nodded demurely, very ladylike, though the smile tugging at the corner of her mouth was hard to suppress. Time slipped by quietly. After Colin finished and Eno exchanged a few words with Fred and George, he and Hermione left the second-floor corridor together. They parted at the staircase landing, much like Cedric and Cho had once done. After all, their common rooms were far apart, one high up and the other down in the basement. Slytherin dormitory. The moment the dormitory door closed behind him, Eno vanished from sight. Back in Shelter Valley, he produced Ravenclaw's diadem. As he settled the ornate, elegant piece on his head, a familiar coolness spread through him. It was like plunging into a clear stream on a sweltering day, washing away restlessness and restoring calm, clarity, and cold reason. Under the diadem's influence, past scenes surfaced, memories and echoes of the original story, viewed with the detached perspective of a third-person observer. He replayed, with painstaking detail, moments from the summer of his third year onward. Time lost all meaning. He didn't notice how long he sat there until finally he removed the diadem and let out a tired sigh. The last image to freeze in his mind was the banquet where the goblet of fire burned, Barty Crouch Sr.'s pale, faltering figure. The diadem hadn't suggested that Barty Crouch Sr. had been substituted. Rather, it had made Eno think of a character who scarcely appeared in the original tale, but whose actions mattered enormously, Barty Crouch Jr. Barty Crouch Jr. was an anomaly, someone who existed largely outside the main narrative's fluctuations. Unlike others, Sirius, Lupin, whose roles changed as the Hogwarts story changed, Barty Crouch Jr. always managed to remain mostly untouched. He had escaped, breaking whatever hold he'd been under with Winky the House Elf's help, at a time when the Ministry was distracted by the Quidditch World Cup. That explained an important truth. No matter how the story at Hogwarts shifted, Barty Crouch Jr. would endure. If fate intended him to run, he would ultimately run. 344. Bloody Letter. Rumors of the second Dark Lord in Shelter Valley. Eno leaned against an oak and turned the Ravenclaw diadem over in his hands. Recent thoughts had cleared up many things that had been vague before. Since Harry's dream that summer, Barty must already have been in league with Lord Voldemort. Otherwise, given Voldemort's power, he wouldn't have allowed Barty to act unchecked, certainly not to kill a Muggle. Later events, like the night of the Quidditch World Cup final, whether because Dumbledore and Newt showed up, or because Pettigrew died, or for some other reason, had intervened. In short, Barty hadn't been the architect of the chaos in the original timeline. Add to that the confirmation that Mad-Eye Moody had been genuine at the start of the school year, and everything started to fit. Eno touched his lips in thought. The dog that bites doesn't bark. He let out a low breath. Unlike the loud, flamboyant Bellatrix, Barty was the kind of talent who really could have earned 12 NUTs, clever, capable, and dangerously competent. Moody's case was a reminder. An experienced, battle-scarred Auror like him wasn't someone a single person could easily fool or overthrow. Meanwhile, at the castle, the infirmary was overflowing. Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Ludo Bagman, Barty Crouch Sr., and Snape, among others, had gathered around a bedside. "Albus, have you found anything?" McGonagall asked softly. She still couldn't bring herself to believe Harry would secretly study the dark arts, let alone kill a dragon at 15. Not yet. But I think Harry is innocent. Dumbledore turned slowly, his blue eyes sweeping the room, though fatigue showed on his face. His examinations had revealed nothing. No curses, no evidence of dark magic. That meant there was no technical reason to accuse Harry of using the killing curse. Only public opinion stood against him. McGonagall exhaled sharply. Innocent? That requires proof. Barty Crouch Sr. interjected, as if fate had appointed him disagreeable. Shut up. Can't you see my student is resting? McGonagall's voice dropped, but her anger was plain. Then let him rest. I'll wait for him. Barty snapped and stalked from the room without another word. Seeing her about to lose her temper entirely, Bagman, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over. Minerva, don't be angry. If you ask me, he wasn't like this before. But rest assured, I'll help with this. Bagman, for his part, was more worried about renegotiating the Triwizard Tournament publicity than anything else. Dumbledore didn't answer. He watched Barty's back as he left, thoughtful and silent. Harry, oblivious to the commotion, slept on. Time slipped like fine sand. By dawn, 2 days after the tournament, the British wizarding world exploded. The Daily Prophet ran a half-page headline in bold, "The Savior and the Killing Curse." Beneath it, a 5-inch black-and-white photograph. Harry, expression blank, wand in hand, pointing at the Hungarian horntail. The 65-foot dragon lay motionless, like it had been put under a potent sleeping draught. The juxtaposition, Savior, Killing Curse, pulled an ugly thread of memory through anyone over 25, dredging up the darkest years. That morning, the paper offered a rare add-on, a small 2-inch film mirror bundled with certain copies. Standard copies still sold for 2 nuts. The mirrored edition jumped to 5 sickles. It was a price hike of orders of magnitude, but under that headline and the novelty of moving images, many bought in. People, wizard or muggle, love a spectacle, and 5 sickles was not too steep for gossip. Back in the Slytherin dormitory, Eno set the Prophet down and looked at Draco. "You said someone's saying Harry's the second Dark Lord?" "Yeah." Draco nodded, face serious. "Last night, someone found a blood-stained letter on the 4th-floor corridor. It said, 'Homage to the second Dark Lord, Harry Potter, Your Excellency.'" Eno listened. The whole thing sounded like a grotesque plot from a sensational tale. Absurd, but exactly the sort of story that would find traction. Once it's spread, Harry would face a storm of accusation unlike anything yet. This wasn't like the Chamber of Secrets rumors in the old sequence. This time, the evidence looked real. Harry had used the killing curse on a dragon, in public, caught on a moving image. Strength, background, fame. Everything about Harry fit what people needed to vilify a celebrity. And with no dark mark in the sky and no World Cup chaos to distract them, Voldemort slipped from memory and Harry became the easy target. In the quiet dormitory, Draco watched Eno fall silent and felt the world tilt. The boy he'd tormented for 3 years, could he really be some successor to Voldemort? Draco shuddered, remembering how he'd even hung Harry up in midair once. With a hesitant voice, he asked, "Eno, do you really think Scarhead is dangerous? Don't overthink it. Just don't provoke him." Eno's frown was automatic. Draco's question was reasonable, but it also showed the mood among the younger students. Gossip can build armies out of whispers. If Harry lived under that pressure, even if he were innocent, people would make him guilty. This was bigger than Hogwarts. Eno glanced again at the newspaper. It was clear Dumbledore had made a mess. Judging by Dumbledore's behavior in the original timeline, the headmaster's infallibility only held inside the castle. Beyond Hogwarts, Dumbledore had always been reactive, not proactive. Now the moving image evidence, the public fury on the Prophet, the bloodied tribute, and the clumsy whispers about a Dark Lord all combined into a dangerous brew. A long moment passed. "Draco, do you think a wizard good enough to get 12 NEUTs is really that exceptional?" Eno asked. Before Draco could reply, Eno rose. He needed to warn Dumbledore, now, before things spun further out of control. "Phew, it's been quite a slog lately, but Xiaodi does his best to write every chapter well." Perhaps it was the nature of snakes, or simply Salazar Slytherin's taste, but the Slytherin common room, hewn into the castle's underground, always wrapped its occupants in a deep, brittle quiet. Eno rose, stood still for a few seconds, then sat back down. For some reason, the castle's murals came to mind, not just the common rooms, but the portraits that lined every corridor. If it hadn't been for that bloody letter, none of this would trouble him. With the letter in Dumbledore's hands, the headmaster could easily trace who had left it and follow the clues. Realizing that calmed him. Whoever was hiding out there was almost certainly after Harry, not the castle itself, and they probably wouldn't want to harm others. Besides, Harry already had enough people looking out for him. Going to Dumbledore now would be nothing more than idle meddling. Relaxing, Eno shifted into a more comfortable position and half reclined in his high-backed chair. "Draco," he asked suddenly, "have you decided on a name for your monthly yet? There's only a month at most. If you hurry, you might even publish early. The timing's good." Draco blinked, taken aback by the abrupt change of topic. After a moment, he stammered, "I thought of one. Hogwarts Past. It won't be news in the usual sense. It'll retell and re-examine things that happened before." Eno's interest was piqued. Mining history for new content was like a bard spinning old tales anew. "That's brilliant," he said at once. "When you graduate, hand it off to the next Slytherin, and make a sister paper, England Past. That'd be excellent too." England Past? Draco's eyes brightened as if he'd stumbled on a new idea, but the glow faded quickly. That's great, really, but I can't even get Hogwarts passed off the ground at the moment. It's too simple to be easy. He sounded frustrated. He'd been the castle's unofficial news gatherer for days, but turning that into a printed magazine felt impossible. I ordered the equipment, but I don't have enough staff. They're all students. Even if someone is willing to work, there's nowhere for them to do it. The common room won't do. Abandoned classrooms mean Filch will find us. And outside the castle, there are too many prying eyes. Eno cut him off with a decisive wave. Minor problems. Draco looked surprised as Eno continued. I have some very reliable people who will work for you, and I can arrange a classroom in the castle, one that won't be disturbed. You can bar anyone from entering without permission, save the headmaster. That's fantastic. Draco sprang to his feet, joy coming on too quickly. Being the castle's news gatherer but not being able to print anything had been its own kind of torture. Then, Eno held up a hand. Don't celebrate yet. I do have conditions. Draco, instantly serious, set his hands on the table and looked at Eno with earnest intensity. The magazine was a passion project, not a moneymaker. If Eno wanted to take it over, Draco wouldn't mind. The printing equipment wasn't worth a few hundred galleons. Eno caught the unspoken sentiment but had no intention of taking over. He raised 2 fingers. 2 points. First, the venue. I can find you a place, but Hogwarts isn't mine. You'll have to pay Hogwarts rent. That's non-negotiable. Eno had thought it through. Hogwarts, with its 1,000-year reputation, was actually under the control of 12 governors. The castle's upkeep depended on external funding. Framed kindly, it was sponsorship. Less kindly, everything at Hogwarts ran on charity. If the funding stopped, the school would struggle to pay professors. In the Chamber of Secrets story, Dumbledore's position had once been precarious for reasons like that. Ordinary people assume the headmaster is the ultimate authority, but only a distinguished head can command that kind of autonomy. Eno remembered Draco's habit from his first year of bragging about his governor father as if the Malfoys owned the castle, a habit formed by what he'd heard at home. Fate had put Dumbledore in charge instead, and the Malfoys had lost the control they'd expected. Ever since Eno saw his own name in the Book of Admittance, he'd thought of ways to develop Hogwarts so it wouldn't be so dependent. He'd considered cultivating the Forbidden Forest and expanding the greenhouses. Now Draco's magazine felt like a small, legitimate campus industry that could help the school earn a little on the side. Even a few galleons could pay for some enchanted lamps on the new student walk. Draco didn't hesitate at the rent. No problem. Rent, fees, whatever. It's a small matter. What's the second point? Eno waved as if unhurried. Second isn't urgent. It's about salaries for my little employees. I'll introduce them once we secure a place. Saying that, he stood. Where are you going? Draco asked. To find Professor McGonagall, Eno said, snapping his fingers. His robe on the hanger obediently flew over. To set the rent. At Hogwarts, matters of castle operation were often better handled by the deputy head than the headmaster. As he left the Slytherin common room and climbed the stairs toward McGonagall's office, polite greetings followed him down the corridor. There seemed to be more greetings than usual, probably the result of yesterday's hand-holding, which some loudmouths had spread around. Eno didn't care, unless he planned to end up like Dumbledore, alone his whole life, in which case he supposed he'd have plenty of grandmothers forming a Dumbledore Appreciation Society when he was old. For now, what he was experiencing was inevitable and not worth fretting over. 6th floor, Transfiguration Office. Professor Minerva McGonagall sat alone at her desk, feeling the weariness of the last 2 days settle into her bones. What should have been a routine Triwizard tournament had, because of an accident, turned into a scandal. How the foreign press would spin it was anyone's guess, and her imagination supplied little comfort. It was not impossible that Hogwarts would be painted as the most tolerant school in Europe when it came to the dark arts. The thought gave her a headache, even as she sat in her office. She sighed. She rose and walked slowly to the window, looking out over the frozen black lake and the bleak edge of the Forbidden Forest. The winter landscape had an air of familiarity that was almost soothing. A rhythmic knock interrupted her reverie. "Come in," she called, waving her wand. The door opened by itself. Good afternoon, Professor. Eno stepped inside with a careful smile. It had only been a day, but McGonagall looked different to him, less brisk, a touch older than usual. He stopped in the doorway, assessing her. Eno? She was mildly surprised by the visit, but recovered quickly, offering a small joke. You should be busier than me at this hour. You flatter me by coming. You flatter me, Professor. No matter how busy I am, I'm still a student. Eno's reply was calm. That she could make light of things told him she had some goodwill to spare. All right, then, McGonagall said, smiling. Tell me why you're here. Apart from the Animagus affair, you haven't been in my office much. Eno pulled a chair forward and sat. He explained succinctly and plainly that his roommate, Draco Malfoy, wanted to start a monthly magazine for entertainment. He outlined their ideas and plans without rushing, answering the gaps in Professor McGonagall's questions as they came. When he finished, McGonagall fell into thought. He watched her respectfully and waited. After a moment, she nodded. In principle, I agree. He let the words settle. She had more to say. A short pause, then. One thing I must be clear about. I do not care what you write, but you must not involve the professors, certainly not excessively. If you make faculty the subject of gossip or ridicule, you put me in a very difficult position. As she spoke, she watched his face. If he had been any other student, she might not have taken the plan seriously. Young wizards and witches started fads, most burned bright and then dropped away. Hogwarts had seen student newspapers and ventures rise and fall over the years, but Eno's manner suggested he would see the thing through. You can rest assured on that point, he said. The joys and sorrows, the grievances of students will not be used to involve professors. If something is truly unfair, we might mention it briefly, but it won't be the focus. McGonagall's eyes softened. That was a reasonable promise. Very well, you have my permission. She reached into her desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment, and set ink to quill. Eno hadn't expected anything so formal. He'd come prepared to discuss details, rent, distribution, supplies, but he had not expected a written authorization. When McGonagall pushed the signed parchment across the desk, he blinked. Professor? He said, prodding the issue he'd been holding back. It seems you've forgotten something. The rent. This isn't a Hogwarts-run enterprise, after all. McGonagall paused, then considered. You're right, she said. We should make the arrangement clear. 2 hours later, Eno left the Transfiguration office clutching a contract. The parchment felt like any other, but at the top was the Hogwarts crest in crisp ink. At the bottom, McGonagall's signature. Nestled into the document was a clause, 7 galleons a year for rent. The formalities were done. As he walked the corridor, he found himself smiling at the memory of McGonagall's astonishment. In her decades of teaching, she had rarely encountered students who proactively volunteered to pay for something. The contract had a peculiar weight to him, less in the vellum than in the sense that it tied the enterprise, however small, to the castle. In the wizarding world, a written agreement had a kind of binding power. Sanctioned by Hogwarts, it felt like more than paper. Small beginnings mattered. 7 galleons a year was modest, but it was independent income, separate from the governor's, and a start. Maybe, he thought, if they managed it well, this could grow into something with real staying power, something to be proud of. Back in the dormitory, Draco nearly vibrated with excitement when Eno showed him the signed parchment. He paced. This is brilliant. This is really brilliant, he kept repeating, as if saying it made it more real. At times he wanted to dash off to find a shop. At others he needed to write letters to suppliers to get printing equipment sent at once. Settle down, Eno said, leaning back. I'll find a place for distribution. You write the letters. With everything going on at the castle, this will be a good time. Don't dawdle until Christmas. Let's get the first issue out as soon as possible. They both stayed silent for a beat, each thinking of the possibilities. During his long meeting with McGonagall, Eno had sat through more than just the formalities. The last hour had been spent listening to McGonagall recount the past 2 days. The chaos of the tournament, Barty Crouch Sr.'s relentless zealotry, the way Crouch's suspicious fervor had bordered on obsession. He had been so consumed by the matter, he might have slept in the hospital wing corridor. The whole thing had left a sour impression. Eno's mind turned to opportunity. If they could publish quickly and well, they could give students the chance to speak, to chronicle what had happened. If there were double standards, those who were strict with others and indulgent for themselves, then the light of attention would show them. The British wizarding community was small. If the students at Hogwarts talked, the whole country would soon know. The first issue would be more than entertainment. It could be a statement. Chapter 347, Changes Brought by Time. Time flows like water. Changes brought by time often happen imperceptibly, like a reflection on a pond that grows faint as ripples spread. 3 full days had passed since the first task, and in that time, the castle had been full of strange new developments. The most obvious was a monthly magazine called Hogwarts Past. Its headquarters were tucked into an abandoned herbology greenhouse outside the castle, and it was run by Draco Malfoy. Location and host aside, a magazine's worth is judged by its content, and Hogwarts Past hit the mark with its very first issue. The paper ran through the castle's scandals with a sharp, humorous touch, recounting rejected confessions, ill-fated dates, and who had been seen holding hands in secret. There was something for every young witch and wizard, whether they'd witnessed the events or not. Beyond gossip, the magazine also covered the hot-button topics of the day: the Goblet of Fire, the Champions, and Harry Potter. One piece drew particular attention, an attack titled The Mask of Hypocrisy, which singled out Barty Crouch Sr., then one of the 7 department heads at the ministry, and his son, Barty. Ordinary publications would have hesitated to name a high-ranking official, but when readers saw the names Swinburne and Malfoy on the byline, the article's boldness became explainable. Barty Crouch Sr. is going too far, Ron exploded in the Gryffindor common room, throwing the magazine onto a table. He's hounding Harry. What for? Claiming fairness? He should look in a mirror. Young wizards could be passionately thick-skinned. Although Harry had publicly killed a dragon with an unforgivable curse and no one had been physically harmed, the dread of the killing curse was fading with time. Yes, Harry made a mistake, but it's not for two-faced people to point fingers, Neville said calmly from his armchair. When Neville spoke, others tended to listen. His quiet voice carried weight. After he finished, Seamus and Ron continued the argument. The Gryffindor common room was hardly unique. Draco had printed 400 copies of the first issue and quietly slipped free copies into the common rooms of all 4 houses. The resulting public opinion ferment made life difficult for Barty Crouch Sr. No matter where he went around the castle, someone offered a mocking remark. Rumor had it even Hagrid's hounds barked at him. At that moment, a troubled Barty Crouch Sr. sat alone in the headmaster's office. He clutched at the thinning hair at his temples and spoke in a voice edged with panic. "Albus, I feel like I've lost a lot of memories. Someone used a memory charm on me." Dumbledore did not answer immediately. He glanced at the hardcover of Hogwarts Past on his desk, then back at his visitor. "I'm curious, do you think what it says is true? That you swapped Barty out back then?" "I don't know. I don't even remember having a son," Barty blurted. The admission was raw and honest. The idea that his own memories had been tampered with unnerved him. He could feel the faintest echo of a son's existence and of a son's past achievements. But no details would come. "Albus, help me. If the magazine's right, I could be finished. But do whatever you must. Catch him, whether he lives or dies." There was pain in Barty's face, but also a resolute edge. He could not remember his son, but he clearly remembered the brutality of the Death Eaters and the havoc of darker years. He had once led Aurors and other officials against Voldemort's forces. As head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, his stern, iron-handed approach had been a pillar of the ministry. Had it not been for revelations about his son's allegiance, Barty might still stand unchallenged among the ministry elite. Time had its way with people. The once formidable department head now looked tired and diminished. Dumbledore watched him with quiet understanding, the pain of conflict between feeling and principle, and knew Barty had ultimately chosen feeling over principle. "Barty," Dumbledore said slowly, "I cannot interfere in ministry affairs. Everyone must answer for their own actions, but I will treat this matter seriously." "That's enough," Barty said, relief flooding his features. "What else do you need to know? Tell me quickly, before the ministry folks come for me. Oh, and no matter what happens, I will take responsibility for Harry." Barty linked Harry's predicament with whatever hidden scheme had tampered with his memories. He smelled conspiracy, and for now was willing to shoulder blame if it would thwart the plotter's plans. Dumbledore said nothing further, but his attention shifted to a cabinet of sweets. He opened the door and produced a shallow stone basin, a pensieve, floating up into the room. The pensieve was carved with ancient runes and filled with a silvery cloud-like substance that hovered like something between liquid and vapor. "Don't be so quick to take the blame," Dumbledore murmured, half to Barty and half to the pensieve as he placed it on his desk. "A memory charm isn't always permanent. Unless it was cast by someone highly skilled in memory charms, ordinary charmed memories can sometimes be restored with a pensieve." He touched the pensieve with a wand, and the silver rippled. For a moment, a look of regret flickered across Dumbledore's face. As for those who are truly proficient in memory charms, if nothing unexpected has occurred, he should still be in Azkaban. With that, Dumbledore prepared to use the pensieve, intent on examining what might remain of Barty Crouch Sr.'s lost recollections. The principal's office on the 8th floor smelled faintly of lemon drops and old parchment. Portraits of past headmasters hung along the walls, each a little world of its own. Now and then, one of them would rifle through an old tale or pretend to sleep with a snore. They watched the room's two occupants with the small, imperturbable curiosity of painted eyes. A silver, ribbon-like strand of memory uncoiled and drifted into the pensieve. With Barty's consent, Dumbledore leaned over and let the scene draw him in. Time slipped away in the cold, clear silence. When Dumbledore finally rose, the composed calm that had rested on his face was gone. He looked grave. "He was utterly reckless," he said at last. Barty's expression flickered between fear and horror. He's really been resurrected?" The memories had overturned everything Barty thought he knew. Someone everyone had thought dead had been brought back through ritual magic and had drawn part of their power back into themselves. "Albus, we must tell everyone. We must prepare," Barty began, panic threading his voice. Dumbledore cut him off with a single raised hand. "Let me think," he said. "Sit quietly." He sank into a near-ethereal trance, replaying the images he had just seen. In the memory, Voldemort's resurrection had been completed using blood forcibly taken from Barty, flesh willingly given by him, and the bones of his Muggle father. Dumbledore opened a drawer and took out a black-covered book, Secrets of the Dark Arts, and let his knowledge of Horcruxes and forbidden rites situate the scene. Blood, flesh, bone, a reconstruction of a body into which a soul ripped from a Horcrux was poured. It was ugly, but comprehensible. And yet Dumbledore's mind would not settle. Voldemort knew the protective power of Lily's sacrificial magic. After 2 defeats involving Harry, any careful plan for resurrection ought to have used Harry's blood to circumvent that protection. If Voldemort had been shrewd, he would have chosen Harry's blood precisely to neutralize that ancient safeguard. For over a long time, Dumbledore had thought he could wait, keep Harry safe, and let events play out, but the memories suggested he had miscalculated. Why would Voldemort not take every precaution? Why this choice? The question sat heavy in Dumbledore's face. Far to the north, about 140 kilometers offshore, on an uninhabited reef island crowned by a weathered lighthouse, a different voice repeated that very confusion. "Master, I don't understand why you spared him. He and I have nothing to do with each other anymore." Barty felt a pang of shame at the memory. Voldemort could have killed him to eliminate any future trouble. Instead, he had erased Barty's memory and let him live. That mercy alone had made Barty believe he had been spared because of his usefulness. He bowed his head in renewed, terrified devotion. Before him sat a figure like a sculpture of unlight, twisted and pale, a face that seemed the product of long dark work and curse. Scarlet eyes glittered with cruelty and hunger. The thin, snake-like nose and the cold, eerie smile at the corners of a mouth put a chill in the bones. An elegant London accent carried each syllable. "Barty, my child." Voldemort glanced first at the tea on the table, then at Barty's scarred hand. Barty, who had been standing, fell to his knees and prostrated himself. "I once thought everything was broken," Voldemort said softly, "but beyond the broken I found completeness." He stroked Barty's disorderly hair as if petting a favored creature. "Master?" Barty murmured, bewildered. Silence. Voldemort lifted a finger, making him quiet. He chuckled, an owl-like chilling sound that nevertheless contained a fragment of recollection. Voldemort, like Dumbledore, was no stranger to the deep, strange corners of magic. Half a century of travel had given him glimpses of artifacts and alchemical relics from Egyptian tombs to Mesopotamian ruins. He had held many things in hand, from simple oddities to great treasures. The Time Turner, relics tied to the Founders, whispers of the Philosopher's Stone, and each left him with the same impossible sense: incompleteness. Then, 3 years earlier in a Hogwarts corridor, attached to Quirrell, he had seen something different. That timid first-year Slytherin had taken a die from his pocket and held it in his palm. Voldemort had expected trifles. Instead, he had felt, as if by instinct, that this object was complete, an alchemical artifact whole in itself. The feeling had lodged in him like a regret. If only he had stayed to seek the stone then, if only he had not been forced to flee Hogwarts, he might have taken advantage of that completeness. Now, reading clippings in the Daily Prophet, Voldemort learned that the timid student had grown astonishingly. Images crowded in his mind. Images like a blue phoenix of fiendfire, a normal orange-red phoenix, a 20-foot whale Patronus capable of bearing a witch or wizard across the sky, and most recently, the Tri-Wizard tournament, and a figure under the ice. He let those wandering thoughts dawn and fade. He trusted Barty, but trusted no one with his designs. The fewer people who knew the whole plan, the more likely others, Dumbledore above all, would be misled into wrong conclusions. Harry Potter, he said, the name a slow knife in the lighthouse air. Barty's own face hardened into hatred at the sound. Voldemort had made his intent clear. Harry was the principal target. He watched his servant's expression with a small, satisfied smile. "You may return now," he said. "Keep in contact with that student. Make sure he stands with us. He may prove unexpectedly useful at a crucial moment." 349. Camellia is blooming. It was mid-December, an ordinary weekend, drizzle laced with a few stray snowflakes that never quite settled. Maybe it was too early in the season, or maybe the rain kept the snow from sticking. Flakes melted before they reached the ground. Although Christmas was approaching, the damp, gloomy weather put the young wizards in the castle into something like hibernation. The fireplaces burned, the common rooms stayed warm. No one wanted to leave unless absolutely necessary. To them, everything felt quiet and desolate, but that only applied to the students inside the main building. Outside, in an old, disused greenhouse, a different scene was unfolding. "Timi, Nilu, print this photo and mark it in a special font." Draco sat at a large desk and gave instructions toward a cubicle across the room. What had once been an abandoned greenhouse was now sumptuously decorated. No fewer than a dozen enchanted lamps lined the walls, casting a warm orange glow that made the dim winter seem pleasantly cozy. "Received, boss," a tender voice replied. The cubicle door slid open, and a tiny, foot-tall human-like doll darted out, snatched the photo from the table, and hurried back to its compartment, closing the door behind it. Draco glanced at a badge on the desk beside him. Associate Editor, Special Correspondent. "Colin, I'm giving you another 5 galleons for expenses. Find me more interesting stories. Scarheads, no, Potter's news is stale." Colin looked up when his name was called, then gave a helpless little grimace. "What can I do if it's stale? There really hasn't been anything new. The only thing I could write is about Miss Delacour's little scandal." He felt the pressure. Lately, the castle had gone stagnant. No big headlines, nothing like the explosion of news from 2 weeks ago. Colin couldn't help but think back to that period. First, Harry had been cleared, then the truth about the killing curse came out. The Daily Prophet claimed an unknown dark wizard had attacked Director Barty Crouch, then used him to cast the curse on Harry. It sounded implausible, but no one openly challenged it. The attack had left Barty Crouch, Director of International Magical Cooperation, gravely injured. He'd resigned. Directors in the ministry were powerful, strong enough to challenge the minister, and nobody believed they would be dismissed merely to defend Harry. Even with Harry's reputation, it seemed impossible. "It's a pity no one verified Barty's story," Colin muttered at his desk, half sighing. He'd written an article called The Mask of Hypocrisy, and though it had circulated in the castle, the ministry had shrugged it off without inquiry. Draco heard the sigh and chuckled, shaking his head. Don't waste your breath. Nobody will seriously go after Barty now, especially since he stepped down. He found Colin's bafflement amusing, but he also knew the fog surrounding recent events extended well beyond the staff room. His father, Lucius, was just as uncertain. The ministry had been unnervingly quiet for the last half-month. When Draco had received a letter from home, there had been only one instruction: stay close to Eno and cultivate that relationship. Draco understood the sentiment was meant to be protective, but he disliked the idea of friendship with an ulterior motive. He'd left the letter open on his dormitory desk. A sharp knocking sounded on the greenhouse door. "Come in." A girl with golden twin ponytails stepped through. Draco recognized her immediately. Hannah Abbott, a regular source for the information department. "I'm here to sell some news," she announced, breezing in with a grin. Her ponytails swayed. "The pleasure's ours. Please sit, Miss Abbott." Draco rose. Hannah was, in many ways, the lifeblood of their little magazine. She made herself comfortable on the visitor's sofa and crossed her legs like an overconfident teenager. Today's scoop. At 9:30 a.m., someone spotted Eno and Granger on a date at the astronomy tower. Also, Ravenclaw's seventh-year prefect Gudgeon delivered a love letter to Delacour at 11, but get this, it got switched. Her words tumbled out at a steady pace while an automatic quill beside her scrawled her account. A soft achoo drifted out somewhere across the grounds. Under an old oak tree in the sanctuary, Eno rubbed his nose. Of course, people were talking about him again. There was nothing he could do about it. People would gossip. Even Dumbledore gets whispered about. Still, he hadn't come out to brood. He had a purpose. He sat on the cold ground and sifted through a pile of scattered gems. With Christmas coming, and after a casual remark from George and Fred, Eno had decided he wanted to make a pair of delicate straw rings as gifts. He'd once received a basket of such rings, but never imagined he'd make and give one himself. The idea of a handmade ring felt right, a small ritual to mark the season. He weighed the stones and finally chose 2 moonstones that gave off a pure, soft white glow. Moonstone, the lover's stone, symbolized gentleness and purity. When light caught it, the gem shimmered with a warm, moon-like luster. Satisfied with his selection, Eno rose and followed the ice-crusted path that led out of the valley. If things went as he hoped, a new story would begin around Christmas: red maples threaded with stories, crawling anacondas, and most captivating, the azure ice flower. It was only a short branch, maybe 2 feet long, but it bore a bloom the size of a teacup. A deep blue pistil sat at the center of layered sea blue petals. The flower was fresh, elegant, and utterly unlike anything else. Eno's breath caught. "Camellia," he murmured. Its shape was unmistakable. At a glance, Eno recognized the ice flower in full bloom. 350. A different Christmas. Christmas. A holiday that should have little to do with wizards, and yet somehow it had become the most anticipated time of year at Hogwarts. In the last week before the holiday, the castle grew livelier by the day. Everyone buzzed with excitement. This year's Christmas dinner was rumored to be special. Dumbledore had reportedly ordered 500 barrels of mead from the 3 broomsticks, and there were whispers that the Weird Sisters would perform with Eno that night. But more than any of that, the thing everyone was whispering about was the legendary Christmas ball. It was no surprise. Teens always longed to taste adult life, and a ball seemed to promise that grown-up glamour. By tradition, only independent adults went to balls, or at least that was how many of the students preferred to think of it. Breakfast had just finished. At the Gryffindor table, Ron was triumphant. "I found a date," he announced to Harry, "and I ordered a decent suit." "Mate, you'd better hurry, or all the good girls will be taken," he added, patting Harry on the shoulder as though giving advice from hard-won experience. Harry chewed and let his gaze wander to the Ravenclaw table next to them. "Ginny?" he asked faintly. Ron's expression shifted, part blessing, part annoyance, a little like someone who'd just discovered his own prize was slipping away. There was, in his face, the odd sting of being left out. Ginny, quick as girls are to notice attention, had already turned. When she met Harry's eyes, she offered him a gentle smile. Ron, standing beside her in that moment, was effortlessly ignored. Harry stared back at her, suddenly blank. "She's liked you since she was little," Ron said with resigned finality. Across the hall in Slytherin, the conversation was quieter and sharper. Daphne Greengrass leaned over to Pansy Parkinson and asked, dismissive, "What do you think of that muggle-born Granger? Are you really going to go for him?" Pansy looked up slowly, coldly unconcerned. "If you like him, go for it. You don't need my opinion." Daphne bristled like an offended cat. "I'm doing what's best for you, and you don't even appreciate it. This is your last chance, you know." She left the rest unsaid, perhaps out of friendship or spite. Pansy smiled calmly. "Then, thank you for your concern. But remember what I said. Most people break up after they graduate." "There you go again," Daphne snapped. "Even if some break up, plenty of them have children afterwards. Forget it. I'm done wasting my breath." She stalked out of the great hall, huffing. Pansy remained perfectly poised on her stool, eyes unreadable as they followed the retreating figure. In the Slytherin dormitory, Eno sat at his desk. The top was strewn with chisels, files, shards of gemstones, and ink bottles full of mysterious liquids. He was working on an alchemical piece, what he was calling the straw ring, and despite his solid knowledge of alchemy, this was only his second attempt at crafting an enchanted item. He smiled a little as he thought of the walking stick staff he'd once tried to make, a vain imitation of Gandalf's. It had belonged more to an imagined Middle-earth than to practical use. It wasn't a regret exactly, but it had taught him much. He picked up a file and hummed to himself while carefully polishing a moonstone the size of an egg, determined to pour everything he'd learned into this ring. 2 days passed like water. As the host of the Triwizard Tournament, Hogwarts was determined to look its best for the visiting schools, and preparations began early. Though Christmas was still several days away, decorations went up across the castle. Banisters on the moving staircases, draped with enchanted icicles, the great hall's ceiling, now a deep purple, strewn with stars. Occasionally, little points of light would drift down like falling stars, beautiful and delicate. Even the suits of armor received special attention. Professor Flitwick had enchanted many of them to hum cheerful carols as people passed. Not every suit behaved nicely, of course. An armor that had once been heard swearing hinted that Peeves was at work. The students were aware of the mischief. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, visiting for the tournament, were not. Professor McGonagall, affronted at the loss of dignity, was unusually strict about discipline. From then on, Filch could be seen hovering in the halls, mop handle in hand, tapping each suit and muttering a litany of complaints. On the 8th floor one afternoon, Filch gave a show of patience, finally exhausted. "Peeves, out now! Don't make me poke you with this stick!" he spat, tugging at an armor with both hands. "Oh, incompetent Filch! Dream of harming Sir Peeves! Preposterous!" The poltergeist crowed, and then passed through the armor, disappearing. Filch let go with a sigh. But Peeves reappeared in the corridor a moment later, floating and balancing 2 large uncapped bottles of ink. Filch closed his eyes in despair. Then a calm voice behind him said, "Peeves, leave." "Boring, boring, boring," Peeves replied, but uncharacteristically, he drifted through the wall and went away on his own. Filch opened his eyes and found himself staring at the student who had intervened. He remembered the boy, 4 years before they had clashed when snow was scattered in the corridors, and he had not expected thanks from that same person. After a moment's hesitation, Filch whispered, "Thank you." "You're welcome," Eno said, voice cool as ever. He'd meant to deliver the straw ring to Hermione, but had stopped to prevent the ink mischief. He did not linger after the exchange. He passed Filch and continued toward the fat lady's portrait. 351. Gifts given out. The 8th floor corridor at the castle smelled of old stone and winter. "I've heard your songs," the fat lady murmured with a hint of melancholy. "They say your singing is full of feeling. I used to be able to do that too, but now I'm only a portrait." "In truth, you don't need to overthink it," Eno said, listening. "Emotion comes from memory. If you can remember something that moved you, then sing. Let the memory show itself in the music and the words." He treated the fat lady's portrait like another landmark to tick off his list. After nearly 4 years at Hogwarts, there were still places he hadn't been. The fat lady's portrait, the kitchens, Ravenclaw's bronze knocker, and the castle never ran out of quiet corners to discover. First-year caution had kept him close. Later, the novelty simply wore off. When you live somewhere long enough, everything eventually becomes familiar. As they chatted outside the Gryffindor common room, a familiar ripple passed through the air, and the fat lady's painted doorway swung open. Eno. Hermione peered out with a warm surprise. Why didn't you tell me through the two-way mirror? I could have come to find you. I remember you don't like climbing stairs. It's nothing, Eno replied with a teasing lilt. Besides, I can't always let you be the one to make the first move. His look lingered on her. Hermione, who wore a simple robe, did look different up close. She'd added a little makeup, a soft pink gloss, a sweep of eyeliner, nothing extravagant, just enough to make her face seem bright and clear. The gloss had been applied in a hurry. A faint smudge of brighter pink at the corner of her mouth gave her away, though she didn't notice, or, more likely, she had far more important things on her mind than small smudges. From the summer before primary graduation until now, Hermione could map the shape of their friendship in precise moments. They were in different houses and saw each other only occasionally, but every meeting was easy and warm. She remembered feeling abandoned and alone 2 months into her first term, when so many students seemed to ignore her. All she had wanted then was to go home. Then, by the library corridor, she'd bumped into Eno. He'd offered comfort and a kind word, and the castle had felt suddenly less vast and cold. The seed was planted then. Later acceptance into Gryffindor and friends like Ginny and Parvati didn't change that first warmth. Over the years it had taken root, and now Hermione felt it quietly grow into something else. A small, almost shy smile tugged at her lips. Eno, are you daydreaming again? Didn't you stop that after third year? Came a teasing voice that snapped her back. She looked up, annoyed and smiling at once. Humph, I don't have a habit of spacing out. Never did, never will. She stamped one foot with mock indignation, but her smile stayed. Then her gaze shifted, and she changed the subject, almost as if embarrassed by her own reverie. Let's go. We should head to the astronomy tower. If we stay here any longer, we'll just attract gawkers. Okay, let's go. Eno had already noticed the heads peeking around the corridor. He hadn't meant to be secretive. The whole point of this outing had been to be seen. Thanks to a roommate who edited the school magazine, he'd heard enough whispers to know that a deliberate public appearance would steer gossip away from Hermione. They walked along the long corridor side by side until a turn revealed the sky outside. Snow drifted down in lazy flakes. The Highlands loved December. We don't have to go to the astronomy tower, Eno said on impulse. We could skate on the Black Lake instead. Hermione shrugged, pleased with anything. Anywhere is fine. Outside, the castle and grounds had been softened by the falling snow. The Black Lake had taken on the look of a winter painting. The surface, frosted and glassy, thin sheets of ice matched inlaid by fresh white. Dozens of small boats rocked quietly at the students' dock. Shall we row? Eno asked, already gliding one into the water. A little magic made the boats skim over the surface, breaking the stillness into delicate ripples. In less than half an hour, they were near the center of the lake. The castle, seen through the swirl of snow, looked more magnificent than ever. Towers and turrets rising like a silhouette against the gray sky. They sat watching, and for a while the world felt like an oil painting come to life. Then Hermione sneezed, a soft, surprised sound that broke the silence. Achoo! Eno, sorry. I didn't think about the cold, she said, a little guilty. He smiled, remembering that his inherited affinity for ice had left him less sensitive to the chill. It's fine. Hermione tapped her wand. Impervious. A pale halo flashed from the tip of the wand, and a shimmer spread. Snowflakes that had been drifting down around them bounced off the invisible barrier and swirled away, leaving the boat in a calm ring of clear air. Magic's good, but I think you need this more, Eno said, and from his robe he produced a small box wrapped in blue velvet. It was about 4 inches square, soft under Hermione's fingers as she took it. An early Christmas present, she guessed, smoothing the velvet with pleasure. Something like that, he said with a secretive smile. Hermione's curiosity flared. Eno had a knack for surprising her. A miniature castle crystal globe the first year, a self-writing quill the second, an exquisite tiny mirror the third. Memories of those gifts made her fingers work faster. She lifted the lid and opened the box. 352, Black Lake in winter. Oh my. Hermione covered her mouth, letting out a soft gasp. Inside the 4-inch gift box lay a set of jewelry that seemed to glow with a gentle moonlight. The first thing she noticed was a beautiful necklace, a chain of delicate silver threads with a smooth, teardrop moonstone pendant. Even in daylight, the moonstone shimmered with a mysterious radiance, a faint, dreamy glow like moonlight against a night sky, elegant and romantic. Beside the necklace were a pair of rings made entirely of moonstone. Compared to the necklace, the rings were crafted simply, smooth moonstones embossed with a straw-like pattern. Yet it was those simple rings that held Hermione's gaze. The finer necklace was almost unintentionally overlooked. After a long moment, she whispered, "Straw rings." She forced herself into a proud, indifferent tone and said, "I actually gave you one too, but you never wore it. You've probably gotten so many that the one I gave you ended up tossed somewhere." Though her voice sounded casual, Hermione's eyes were slightly reddened and her smile betrayed how anything but calm she felt. "I didn't throw the straw rings away," Eno interjected with a sigh. "No matter what, they were given with feeling, but they're ultimately mass-produced. What I made for you is unique." "For example?" Hermione's smile widened. She seemed to be waiting for him to explain. "Before you answer, put on the necklace." Eno didn't reply immediately. He pointed at the necklace in the box. "Don't underestimate it. When I made it, I used nearly all my alchemy knowledge." "You made all of this yourself?" Hermione's face changed again. Where there had been a faint smile, now there was plain delight. "Yes, I made them all, including the raw materials." On hearing that, Hermione picked up the necklace without another word. The silver threads settled around her fair neck, and as the clasp closed, a wave of warmth and calm spread through her. Even out on the Black Lake in winter, with snow drifting down, she felt no cold at all. "This is..." Hermione looked up, puzzled. "Alchemy," Eno said. "Not only does it protect against cold and heat, but I added several other effects." He listed them one by one like a proud craftsman. Compared to the rings, the moonstone necklace had been his labor of love. He had engraved it with many ancient runes and even woven in a triggered enchantment, the shield charm, following Nicholas's notes. A moment later, Hermione declared, "I prefer the straw rings." Despite the necklace's practicality, she had a clear preference. "All right," Eno smiled and spread his hands. "As long as you like it." He glanced at the larger ring still in the box. "I gave you your Christmas present early, but don't you owe me something in return?" Following his gaze, Hermione looked down at the larger ring. She pursed her lips, then smiled sweetly. I'll give it to you now, Mr. Swinburne." Pleasant conversation made time slip away. Outside the castle, over the broad, still black lake, a small boat drifted gently with no wind. Snow fell steadily. Hermione leaned comfortably against the wooden beam at the bow where an oil lamp hung, casual and easy, but her eyes kept drifting to the moonstone ring on her right hand. She watched Eno's hand, too. He wore an identical ring. Smiling, as if at a private joke, she extended her hand. When the two rings touched, tiny sparks like snowflakes blossomed around them, cold motes of light that hung like falling stars. Hermione delighted in the effect, but she kept pulling her hand away the instant the light appeared, making the halo flash on and off. It wasn't much of a game, but she seemed to enjoy it endlessly. Eno watched quietly, smiling. Her behavior reminded him of himself once, of the little fire-making spell game under the bridge, a small trick he'd played for hours without getting bored. After a while, the playful interlude ended. Hermione smoothed her hair and said seriously, "Felix Felicis is still 3 months away. I wonder if it will be ready in time for the second task." "Felix Felicis?" Eno sounded surprised at the name, then remembered what she meant, the batch brewing in the room of requirement. "Speaking of potions, Professor Snape's been rushing about more than usual. Is he still tutoring you?" Eno remarked casually. The unexpected events of the first task had seemed to set Snape on edge. Though Harry had come through without being questioned by the Ministry, Snape had been like a tightly wound clock. Apart from potion lessons, he wasn't to be seen. "Professor Snape? He stopped bothering me after the term started," Hermione said, shaking her head. "He says that since I can brew Felix Felicis on my own, there's nothing more he can teach me." While the two of them chatted on the boat, Snape sat alone in his small, secluded office. Once the dark room where Peter Pettigrew had been imprisoned, the cubicle was naturally secretive. It wasn't large, perhaps 10 square meters. In the quiet dimness, a single candle gave a faint light. One wall was lined with shelves of half-processed ingredients. Opposite them stood a round stone table about 2 feet across, a cauldron boiling on its surface. Beyond that, at the back of the room, a wider wooden table stretched along the wall. Snape sat there, frowning over a thick, aged tome. Beside the open book lay a black-covered volume that exuded a gloomy aura. Its cover bore a line of vivid red script, Secrets of the Dark Arts Revealed. 353, Cutting-Edge Black Magic Revealed. The Chamber of Secrets was dim and still. Snape sat alone at the table. He trusted potions more than he trusted human hearts. It was like that night 15 years ago. Everything that had happened in Godric's Hollow felt absurdly arranged, as if fate had been meticulously choreographed. Since then, he had trusted no one. Now, he had been told Harry's condition was stable, but the sudden appearance of the killing curse on the Quidditch pitch felt like silent mockery. Stable? A student not yet in his 5th year had killed a dragon with a single blow. Whether his magic was truly strong enough was one thing. The murderous intent alone was something no ordinary adult wizard possessed. And that assessment rested on the assumption that the person had already been resurrected. Under such circumstances, calling the situation stable was almost a joke. Horcrux. The whisper hung in the dark room. After a long moment, Snape opened a drawer at his right and took out a separate photo album. Friendship Forever, Lily Evans. His hand trembled as he traced the letters on the cover. He turned the flyleaf. There she was, a very beautiful girl, with long, dark red hair and almond-shaped green eyes. In the photograph, she seemed to know someone was watching, smiling like a flower in bloom and waving. Time slipped by in the silence. Eventually, Snape closed the album and wiped the corner of his eye with a finger. Then, as if a decision had been made, his gaze fixed on the closed book beside him. Secrets of the Dark Arts. He did not truly understand Horcruxes. He only understood them from books. For a potions master, book knowledge alone was not enough. One needed intuitive, practiced experience to brew targeted draughts. And the only plausible answer before him was the one he dreadfully suspected, creating Horcruxes. Snape pulled back his sleeve. The maledictus dark mark was still faintly visible. Perhaps there was not much time left. The person had been resurrected and then, oddly, kept a low profile. Dumbledore, too, seemed to be plotting. Images of the two men alternated behind his eyes for a long while. Snape rose abruptly and took a small bottle of golden, sparkling potion from the ingredients shelf. He uncorked it and drank exactly 1 spoonful. As the Felix Felicis slid down his throat, the images that had haunted him vanished and were replaced by a single, clear picture. By the river Thames at sunrise, a black-haired boy sitting beneath the arch of a bridge, quietly eating cheap, fried fish alone. Time moved on like water. It was soon December 24th. Normally, Hogwarts would be emptying for the Christmas holidays. The train at this hour would have taken young witches and wizards home to celebrate with their families. This year, however, nobody chose to leave. The train had stopped at Hogsmeade and unusually did not depart. On Christmas Eve, heavy snow had fallen all morning. The Beauxbatons' carriage, huge as a house, gleamed like a frosted giant pumpkin against the white landscape. Nearby, Hagrid's and Moody's huts looked like slices of pumpkin pie dusted with powdered sugar. The Great Hall was crowded even at breakfast. During the holidays, the house elves turned out richer fare, and even a simple morning meal drew a crowd. The food at Hogwarts is a little greasy. I'm worried my dress won't fit, Hermione said, frowning across the Gryffindor table. In front of her, plates held black pudding and haggis, the former a blood sausage, the latter a dense national dish made from sheep offal and other rich ingredients. You ordered a custom dress? You didn't tell me. Ginny turned, mock hurt. I didn't order one, Hermione replied quickly. I wrote home and asked Mum to buy one from a mall. It's not custom, and I don't have any galleons, only pounds. She looked a little embarrassed. Ginny's playful expression vanished. Why didn't you tell me? I'll swap with you. If people find out the girlfriend of the Film Mirror founder doesn't have galleons for a dress, it'll be the joke of the year. I don't want to spend his money, Hermione said without hesitation. Going to get married then? Lacking confidence? Ginny teased, eyeing the moonstone ring on Hermione's hand. When Hermione had first shown it a few days earlier, it had set the common room abuzz. The girls had been oddly sour and sharp. "I have confidence," Hermione answered, a little louder than she meant to. A few heads turned their way. All right, I know," Ginny soothed, like calming a startled pygmy puff. "Now tell me about malls. I've never been to a muggle mall. Is it like Diagon Alley?" Hermione thought for a moment. There are different kinds of malls. Some are just specialty stores. Others are more like Diagon Alley, with all sorts of things. Ginny listened intently. When Hermione finished, she made a promise. "This summer, if you have time, I'll write to you and take you shopping." "Then it's a deal," Ginny agreed immediately. Perhaps because of her family, she was curious about everything Muggle. Soon the conversation turned from dresses to malls, cosmetics, and other girlish things. Up in the Slytherin dormitory, the mood was not peaceful either. When Eno woke that morning, he found the dormitory overflowing with gifts. To keep things from becoming chaotic, he summoned Blue Lantern to help unwrap and sort them. Draco, he had long since given up counting on, now a bona fide magazine editor, he was perpetually busy and rarely seen. While unwrapping a box of chocolates, Blue Lantern's voice rang in the room. "Master, I think this requires your personal inspection." He held a package wrapped in plain craft paper, rectangular like a book. Eno frowned almost imperceptibly. Blue Lantern had not even suggested a personal inspection for a generous box of Amortentia-laced chocolates. Still, he took the package. The brown paper was ordinary, but a faint, elusive gloom clung to it. As soon as that negative emotion surfaced, a black mist swallowed it. A boggart that had been lurking in the shadows immediately devoured the diffuse feeling and then slid, silent and hungry, into the shadow beneath Eno's feet. 354. Snape's Entrustment, the mysterious number 7. The dormitory was littered with gifts. As the boggart wilted back into the shadows, Eno relaxed his brow. The package, contrary to his first fear, was not cursed with the dark arts, only a faint trace of dark arts residue clung to it. Relieved, he began to unwrap it casually. When the last layer of parchment fell away, a black-bound book appeared. Secrets of the Darkest Arts. Interesting. Holding the book, Eno felt a sudden chill of curiosity. A present like this was well beyond the scope of a prank love potion. As he wondered who would dare send such a thing, a magically sealed envelope slipped out from under the cover. A weighty tome on advanced dark magic, concealed by protective enchantments. Whoever had arranged this must have had considerable skill. Among the people he knew, only two could pull off that kind of concealment easily: Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel. But given their temperaments, neither seemed likely. He was about to set the speculation aside and open the envelope when he noticed its thickness, at least 5 pages of paper. A quarter of an hour later, Eno laid down the last sheet. The smile that had been there at the start had vanished, replaced by a hard, alert look. He read the final line aloud to himself. He actually gave up on Harry and chose Barty Crouch Sr. instead. The letter was from Snape, and it was long, dense, and economical. No wasted words. The picture it painted differed sharply from the familiar tale. Voldemort had been resurrected, but he had not targeted Harry's bloodline as in the usual account. Nor had he immediately rallied Death Eaters or stormed Azkaban. Instead, extraordinarily, he chose to lie low. That choice alone jarred with the story as everyone knew it. Eno found himself trying to slip into Voldemort's head, to trace the arc of a man who had been brilliant in his youth, fanatically ambitious in his early adulthood, altered by a 10-year journey after graduation, and then, after death, returned with a new, neurotic edge. The change in temperament after resurrection had always been hard to reconcile. If Voldemort could learn to play for time, enduring rather than striking, could Dumbledore still handle him as cleanly as before? Dumbledore had principles, and those principles were vulnerabilities. Snape's letter reminded Eno of past incidents. Myrtle's death, for instance, could have been solved by legilimency. The old headmaster's refusal to cross certain lines, his stubborn insistence on preserving mental privacy, meant he sometimes watched consequences unfold rather than forcing a solution. To some, that was noble restraint. To others, dangerous pedantry. Once you opened someone's mind, the repercussions could be profound. A single violation might unravel a life. If Dumbledore had employed legilimency, then, would he still be the same Dumbledore? But Eno's thoughts returned to Voldemort. In school, he had been able to manipulate Dumbledore within the rules. It made no sense that he would later be outmaneuvered into madness. Yes, the dark arts could corrode the mind, but Snape's description suggested something else had happened during Voldemort's travels, a particular experience that altered him. Eno tried to simulate that change. A portrait suddenly drifted into focus in his mind: Isaac Newton. On reflection, Newton's life bore some curious parallels to Tom Riddle's. Newton, celebrated across disciplines, mathematics, physics, astronomy, had later descended into odd, even obsessive behavior. Scholars blamed overwork, bereavement, mercury poisoning, theological obsessions. Eno found those explanations unsatisfying. He imagined instead that after Newton reached the pinnacle of his science, he had stumbled on some new truth, something that overturned the foundations of everything he had built in his youth. For a man who had devoted his life to discovery, realizing that his life's work might be fundamentally flawed could shatter him. Mapping that image onto Voldemort, Eno found resonance, the same brilliance, the same single-mindedness, and then a breakdown into obsession and instability. What had Voldemort been after, at the core of his striving? Alone on the dormitory floor, chin resting on his hand, Eno ran through the familiar answers: pure blood supremacy, absolute power, domination, glory. Each suggestion flashed and was rejected. Then, seeing the dark arts book Snape had sent, a thought struck him sharply: Horcruxes, immortality. Of course, he had been blind to the obvious. Once he had that, another figure suggested itself: Nicholas Flamel. Eno remembered their meeting in France. Flamel had claimed 665 years of life, and though Eno had not met Flamel's wife, their ages had seemed similar. Flamel, by all appearances, did not have many years left. Still, a pattern emerged. Flamel's longevity, earned by the Philosopher's Stone, stopped short of 700. Voldemort had split his soul into 7 Horcruxes. Both had hit a limit around the number 7. One sought immortality through alchemy, the other through the darkest magic, and neither had crossed whatever barrier the number 7 represented. The difference lay in attitude. Flamel had lived centuries and had made peace with death. Voldemort, on the other hand, discovered that his life's pursuit might be a castle in the air. That realization, if it came, could explain how the once brilliant Tom Riddle hardened into the implacable Lord Voldemort. Eno rubbed his forehead. It still puzzled him why the resurrected Voldemort, faced with the impossibility of true immortality, would cease to be impulsive and petulant and instead opt to lie low. The Voldemort of the usual tale rampaged precisely because he could not accept limits. Yet here he seemed to have become calculating. For a moment, Eno considered an amused hypothesis, then dismissed it. The number 7, the most revered and enigmatic number in the magical world, hinted at some deeper rule. Even a wizard as legendary as Voldemort might not be able to break through such a principle. History was full of prodigies and unassailable geniuses. Rowena Ravenclaw alone represented an unsurpassable peak. Perhaps some rules, like certain numbers, were woven into magic itself, and even the greatest minds could only bow to them. 3:55, fantastic Christmas dinner. The dormitory was quiet. Blue Lantern was still diligently tearing open packages. The rustle of wrapping paper never stopped. Eno no longer felt like unwrapping gifts. Although he'd just worked out Voldemort's logic, he understood Severus Snape's predicament all too well. Was Snape intelligent? Undoubtedly. Exceptionally so. A clever man who had spent over a decade at Voldemort's side would, if he kept his wits, inevitably notice things were wrong. Snape's letter, which on the surface read like a report on the current situation, was really a plea, a request to entrust someone with his affairs. At the end of the letter, Snape had even handed over the key to his Gringotts vault, a lifetime's accumulation for a potions master. It might not have been everything, but it was considerable. Time passed quietly. With doubts gnawing at him, Eno stayed in the dormitory for most of the day. At noon, he had Blue Lantern make something simple to eat and spent the rest of the time lost in thought. If he could, he wanted to help Snape, repay the favor if possible. Evening crept in before he realized it. At 6 o'clock, Eno rose and went to the wardrobe. Inside were several robes the ministry had provided for the Quidditch concert. He had only worn one before. The rest had been given to him by Ludo Bagman as a favor. Custom-made, Bagman had said, and too good to refuse. He chose a robe of silver-gray silk, the cuffs and hem embroidered with pale purple vines. Dressed, he stepped out of the dormitory. Tonight, Hogwarts looked exceptionally splendid. The students were no longer uniformly cloaked in black. The castle was awash with colorful evening dresses, giving the whole place the air of a medieval royal banquet. In the Gryffindor common room, Harry sat alone on a sofa, bored and waiting for his partner. Ron and Neville had left earlier. "Sorry, Harry. Did I keep you waiting?" Ginny called from the girls' dormitory steps. Harry turned at once. Seeing Ginny, he had to admit she'd changed overnight. A figure-hugging purple gown showed off her graceful shape. Her long, red, curly hair framed her face, every curl underscoring her youthful charm. Ginny, you look beautiful." Harry's words came out in stammers, but the meaning was clear. Ginny giggled. "All right, let's go. The champions are opening the dance." At 7 o'clock, the two great oak doors of the great hall swung open, and the familiar sight had been transformed. The ceiling was a soft purple, scattered with starlight, and tiny fairies, no bigger than an inch or two, fluttered everywhere like creatures from a fairy tale. They beat their iridescent wings and drew shimmering rainbows across the hall. The walls had been enchanted as well. Where once stood candelabras, hundreds of 3-foot-tall Christmas trees now hung, each topped with an orange glowing 5-pointed star. The little trees served as lighting and were hung with honeydew sweets. Tap a tree with your wand, and a candy tumbled out. Harry stared at the scene, lost for words. Then he noticed the noise behind him had fallen away. Years of training with Mad-Eye Moody made him turn around automatically, hand going to shield Ginny, but he relaxed when he saw who was coming. Eno walked toward them, arm in arm with Hermione. Ginny, noticing Harry's stare, puffed into his ear and made him look away. The sensation broke his daze, and he blushed. He hadn't expected Hermione to look like that. Hermione moved gracefully, every step poised. She wore 3-inch black heels and a pale blue, fitted gown that had been altered to be elegant rather than flashy. The slit and open back elements had been minimized. A moonstone necklace, the size of a pigeon's egg, rested on her chest, emitting a soft, white glow that complemented the dress and made her seem like a goddess stepped down from a painting. Hermione drew many admiring looks, but she did not monopolize them. A surprising number of eyes were fixed on her companion. In daily life, Eno usually wore plain black robes and kept to himself, and people had formed a stereotype of him. Tonight, he had changed completely. His silver-gray satin robe gleamed under the starlit ceiling, bringing out his handsome features, amber eyes, and gentle smile. Many girls couldn't look away. Some even produced old-fashioned film cameras to capture the sight. At 8 o'clock, Professor McGonagall entered with the other two heads of house. Dumbledore was conspicuously absent, but few seemed to care. Everyone's attention was on the ball. "Champions and your partners, please come this way," McGonagall called, and the 4 champions stepped forward. There was a brief wardrobe clash. Flair wore a silver-gray gown too. Feeling the awkward pressure along his arm, Eno smiled and, under everyone's gaze, lightly touched his cuff. The silver-gray fabric shimmered and turned to sea blue, harmonizing perfectly with Hermione's dress. Hermione pursed her lips, a flash of triumph in her eyes. It was tradition for the champions and their partners to perform the opening dance at the Triwizard Tournament. As they took their places, Professor Flitwick climbed onto a stool and conducted a row of enchanted instruments. When his wand moved, a clear, lilting waltz began to play. Eno took Hermione's hand as the music began. 2 moonstone rings met, and a pale, moon-like halo shimmered 2 feet above their heads. Tiny, sparkling lights drifted down like snow. "This dance is called First Encounter," Eno murmured into Hermione's ear, his voice just audible over the music. 356, Home Visit. Voldemort knocks on the door. The Christmas banquet ran on until midnight. Dancing had been demanding, but the students at Hogwarts seemed to carry boundless energy. Even after hours on the floor, few were willing to leave when the music stopped. For many, tonight's ball would be unforgettable, especially the 7th years, who lingered as if making one last farewell to their school days. At last, the younger years, though still reluctant, returned to their dormitories, and the Christmas banquet drew to a successful close. December 25th opened the 10-day Christmas holiday. The professors were merciful with homework, but first and second years were still disgruntled for a simpler reason. Only third years and above could visit Hogsmeade during the day. The younger students had to remain in the castle. Remain was a flexible word. Hufflepuffs might be obedient, but nobody expected the Gryffindors to be. Professor McGonagall had anticipated this. Filch stood at the castle entrance with his usual sour expression, scrutinizing every student who passed. And Mad-Eye Moody, newly appointed gamekeeper, was stationed in Hogsmeade itself, his magical eye sweeping for anyone who slipped past Filch's line. None of those precautions concerned Eno. At 9 that morning, after washing, he and Hermione had returned to the Hogsmeade cottage. With Blue Lantern's help, they'd had a hearty breakfast, and Hermione, intent on making their lodgings festive, had set out to decorate the second-floor rooms. By noon, Eno was idly sitting in the first-floor sitting room. The fire crackled. The extra occupant had made the cottage feel cozier, and Hermione had already run downstairs 4 times in 3 hours, each time returning with a large bag of things. Eno, half reclined on the sofa, lulled by the soft roar of the fire. When the grandfather clock struck 12, he opened his eyes and, still lounging, called, "Blue Lantern, prepare lunch. Keep it light. Breakfast was too much." There was no reply. Blue Lantern didn't appear. Eno sat up. Before he could speak again, a rhythmic knock came at the front door. He went to open it. The sight on the doorstep froze him. Black robes, a flat, pale face, no hair, eyes like wet garnets, and in one hand a paper bag bearing the Honeyduke's logo. Lord Voldemort stood in the doorway, a pitch-perfect picture of Christmas intrusiveness. "Good day," Voldemort said with an oddly genteel drawl. "Forgive my unannounced visit. I believe we have met." Eno's first instinct was to call for Phoenix, but neither Corvus nor Fide answered. Voldemort, sensing something, placed a hand on his chest, inclined his head slightly, and added, "I confess I have taken certain precautions. I come in sincerity, and it would be a pity if I could not see the house's owner." As he spoke, the sky over Hogsmeade, which had been clear moments before, began to seed with snow. A biting wind whipped through the little village, and a shadow at Eno's feet seemed to writhe and lengthen. A thin black mist rose along the floorboards. "Eno, has someone come?" Hermione's clear voice floated down from the second floor. The snowflakes thinned as if someone had turned off a tap, and the black mist dissolved. Eno answered calmly, "No, stay upstairs. It's best if you take a nap." He moved to seal the stair door with frost, the runes of the spell snapping into place as cold crept along the wood. Voldemort watched in silence until the frost had fully closed the doorway. Then, with almost casual manners, he said, "Won't you invite me in? I brought cream toffee." "You may come in, sir," Eno said, making a small, controlled gesture to the side. He had little choice. Voldemort mentioning cream toffee showed he had done his homework. He'd likely prepared anti-apparition wards and restrictions that even prevented Phoenix familiars. Hermione, and even Dumbledore, who had left the previous night, could all be accounted for in his calculations. Voldemort inclined his head and stepped inside. He set the Honeyduke's bag on the tea table as if placing a single polite obligation on the room. "Even if you don't eat them," he said, fingering the bag, "one must praise Mr. Flume. His recipe hasn't changed." Eno slumped onto the sofa and let out a measured sigh. "What surprises me more than anything," he said conversationally, "is your condition, sir." The small talk was deliberate. He was buying time for Hermione. Upstairs, Hermione had taken one glance at the frost-sealed door, and then at the words etched across the panel in frozen script. "Go out the window. Escape. Light the feather. Corvus will send you back to the castle." She didn't hesitate. Wand at the ready, she transfigured a length of rope into a soft ladder and fed it out the window. The cottage's Victorian second floor was only a little over 3 meters from the ground, low enough that a careful descent was possible. Quietly, she swung one leg over the sill and began to climb down. In the sitting room, Eno pinched the bridge of his nose as the rope ladder thudded against the opposite window. The sound was scarcely more than a soft bump, the kind most people wouldn't notice. But this visitor was not most people. Voldemort's voice came without surprise, almost conversational. "You could have let her take the stairs," he said. "I am merely visiting. Truly, I mean no harm." Eno didn't reply. He watched the ladder until Hermione's form slipped out of sight, and he could no longer hear the scrape of fabric on wood. Only then did he relax enough to meet Voldemort's gaze. "Then, sir, I thank you for coming. Let us speak of the purpose of your visit." Voldemort took a seat as if he had every right to be there. He chatted lightly about the toffees. Apparently Mr. Flume's craftsmanship had not declined, and set the bag a little closer, as if it were both offering and proof of good intent. Honeyduke's Sweet Shop, for the record, was the sort of place that lived up to its logo. It sold chocolates and an array of magical confections and was beloved by students and staff alike. Ambrosius Flume ran the shop, and when he was down in the cellar restocking, his wife took care of the counter above. At Christmas, the shop was a crush of people. Its cellar was full of dusty wooden crates, a long wooden stair led up to the shop proper, and the bell over the door chimed constantly as customers came and went. Tonight, the bag on the table smelled faintly of sugared caramel and nostalgia, and of a man who would use such small comforts to gain entry. Hogsmeade on Christmas carried a thin, biting cold. Snowflakes began to drift down, and Mad-Eye Moody looked up without meaning to. "You two, get back now. I can pretend I didn't see a thing." He was speaking to two young wizards who were clearly not yet third years. The pair faced his wildly turning magical eye, and still shaken, nodded. "Yes, sir, we'll go back now." They exchanged a puzzled look, but didn't stop. They ran off toward the other side. At the same moment, Hermione climbed down the rope ladder, slipped out of the cabin's residential area, and hurried toward Old Ban's alchemy shop. The place she had left deserted was now bustling, and the change relaxed her. She spotted Mad-Eye Moody not far away, and after a quick calculation of risk, she reached into her inner pocket and drew out a bright orange-red feather. With a soft chirp, Corvus materialized on her shoulder. "Corvus, take me back to the castle," she whispered. An orange-red glow flared, and the girl and the phoenix vanished from sight. Moody watched the whole thing. When their figures disappeared, his magical eyes slowed, and he stared up into the falling snow with a more reflective expression, almost impressed at the youngster's tricks. As Hermione left, another scene unfolded on the cabin's parlor floor. The atmosphere in the living room had, on the surface at least, smoothed into a strange calm. "Purpose of your visit?" Lord Voldemort asked with a faint smile. The grin made his pale face only more terrible, but his manner was composed, even courtly. "Eno, may I call you that? What I want to say is, this summer you met the famous Nicholas Flamel, under the arrangement of a certain biased professor." He produced a small, 3-inch pocket mirror and let his pale fingers trail over the filigreed edge. "A remarkable object. If I were your professor, I'd have introduced such a student to a legendary alchemist as well." Eno leaned back on the sofa and answered slowly. "Of course, you can call me Eno. But that mirror, the knowledge in it came from our predecessors. I only brought it back from history." There was no arrogance in his tone. He admitted that the mirror owed its ideas to the two-way mirror and the mirror of Erised. Even the alchemical formulas had been inspired by a single helix curve found in the two-way mirror. Voldemort smiled without committing, then steered the conversation on. "Meeting Mr. Flamel must have shown you one thing. Many high-level alchemical artifacts are incomplete. Not just high-level items," he went on. "Ordinary things, trinkets, laughing props, incomplete too. No one bothers to study them in depth." He listed examples as if reading from a catalog of regrets. Ancient Egyptian pyramids, pharaohs' tombs, the plains of Mesopotamia, the great civilizations of the two rivers, the relics of the giants in Albania, the cultures of centaurs and merpeople. Everything, from the visible remnants that felt fractured and half understood. Voldemort's voice was calm but threaded with regret. Eno sat and listened, a slowly forming conclusion in his mind. Voldemort had not given up on immortality. If anything, the old man's hopes had been rekindled. That explained the change in him. Where once there had been madness, paranoia, and reckless fury, he was now composed and rational. It made sense. When a pursuit that seemed hopeless suddenly offers a new lead, even the most stubborn mind will settle and plot. Silence fell over the room. The fire in the grate became the center of that small world, flames licking the logs and throwing a warm amber light. The crackle of burning wood underscored the pause. "So," Eno asked after a while, "did you come all this way just to tell me that?" Before Voldemort could answer, he added, "To be honest, I have no interest in stirring old fights. Given how you are now, a lot of things are already in the past." It was a compromise of a sort, the tone measured. Eno had weighed the matter long and hard. A lucid Voldemort was not someone to provoke, not from fear, but because it simply wasn't worth the expenditure of risk. The old headmaster, Dumbledore, could not outplay the other man now any more than a cautious chess player could win against someone willing to break some rules to take 2 or 3 moves at once. They were in the same match, but the pieces and the rules had shifted. Voldemort had even drawn Dumbledore away, then brazenly let himself be seen in Hogsmeade and purchased sweets at Honeyduke's. The news of his resurrection and whereabouts had been spread deliberately. A desert proverb crept into Eno's thoughts. Which snake, soft of body, ripples and strikes with fangs deadly as venom? The image was apt. Only moments later, Voldemort laughed, the sound unsettling from that pale, terrible countenance. "We are true Slytherins," he said. "Excellent. Even if you killed that king of snakes, it was only Slytherin's pet." It was a sudden reference to the basilisk. Eno remained unruffled. From the moment Voldemort had produced the butterbeer, or rather, mentioned the creature, he had stopped being surprised. 5 months had passed since that summer, and who knew what the Dark Lord had learned in that time? If he could speak of the basilisk, the Horcrux diary must have been involved. Through all of it, Eno could not quite grasp what in him had drawn Voldemort's interest. Ignoring Harry, the Dark Lord had gone to extraordinary lengths to pry into his past tastes and associations, and even contrived to draw Dumbledore away. That was what puzzled him most. Why single him out? Why pursue those threads so carefully? 358. The truth is revealed. The whole story Hogwarts during the holidays was still unusually lively. Although many students had gone to Hogsmeade, the castle thrummed with activity. A bright orange-red flash announced Hermione's return to the Gryffindor common room as she apparated into the middle of it, Corvus cradled against her chest. "Merlin's beard," Ron blurted from a corner. Then, seeing who had just appeared, he muttered under his breath, "She's not even married yet, and she's already got a phoenix?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough for the girls nearby to snort in obvious displeasure. Hermione, however, had no time for that. As soon as she'd confirmed she was back at Hogwarts, her only thought was finding help. She left the common room without delay, clutching Corvus the whole way. On the 8th floor landing, she paused before the fat lady's portrait, hesitating for a split second. Time was tight, and she wasn't sure who to seek out. Before she left Gryffindor Tower, she had meant to find Dumbledore, but then she remembered this morning's Daily Prophet. The headmaster was at the International Confederation of Wizards and wouldn't be back yet. The hesitation disappeared. "Corvus, take me to the castle's dungeons," she said with quiet determination. Word spread fast. In the castle's underground, a group of Slytherins noticed the familiar figure who had once broken in single-handedly a year ago. This time, unlike last year's spectacle, people made room for her as she moved through the corridors. Setting aside whatever had happened at yesterday's ball, the phoenix in her arms explained more than words could. Many recognized the orange-red bird. Even if they didn't know Dumbledore's phoenix by name, the fiery Corvus had been captured in the moving pictures of the Quidditch World Cup. Its face was familiar. Hermione reached the potions classroom, Corvus still held close, and rapped on Snape's office door. Meanwhile, in a small house in Hogsmeade, Lord Voldemort sat across from Eno and made his request. "In all the incompleteness, I saw completeness. Do you still have that die of yours?" he asked. At the mention of the die, Eno froze for a moment. Then, thinking back to the summer of their first year, when he'd gripped the life-saving die to avoid being alone with Voldemort, he understood what the Dark Lord meant. "I still have it," Eno said. He drew the die from an inner pocket and laid it flat in his palm. Voldemort's eyes brightened until they were nearly 2 red lanterns, fixed obsessively on the object. "Yes, that's it. I knew it. Behind completeness, there must be complete rules. Ha 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 ha!" He laughed, a strange mixture of relief and triumph. A moment later, the laughter ebbed and his expression softened. "If possible," he said smoothly, "please grant me the courtesy of selling it to me. Name your price. Galleons, gold, a potion, anything. Ask, and it shall be yours." Eno shook his head decisively. I'm sorry, but I haven't found anything more precious than this. To be honest, if Voldemort's offer had come with the right terms, the die might have been negotiable. But in Eno's hands, it was more than a lifesaver. It was a coordinate to the world where Teacher Hans was, and a chance for him to be the protagonist of a story again. For something like that, not even a complete Philosopher's Stone would be enough. Voldemort's face remained composed at the refusal. Unwilling? Very well, he said coldly. Transactions are mutual, not coerced. However, I would like you to take me to the place where you found it, and the offer stands. Name your price, and I will meet it. I do not believe you will refuse this time. He spoke with the kind of politeness that made Eno uneasy. For a moment, Eno considered giving in. He did not want to provoke Voldemort. But both of the Dark Lord's requests, hand over the die or lead him to its source, were far more dangerous than they sounded. If all the Horcruxes were accounted for, Eno might have risked bringing Voldemort into the sanctuary again, but only 6 were known, including Harry. Over the years, Eno had built a life with friends, Hermione, Draco, Snape, and others, and he wouldn't risk them for nothing. There was no benefit in needlessly turning a rational Voldemort into a mortal enemy. He weighed the choice, stuck in an agonizing dilemma. Voldemort, watching him, didn't press. Instead, he reached for a paper bag, produced a piece of candy, and began to eat slowly, as if savoring the pause. In that case, please wait here for a moment, my lord, Eno said at last. He vanished from his seat. The casual air left Voldemort as soon as Eno disappeared. He sat up straight, the easy smile he'd worn since entering the room vanished like smoke. His eyes narrowed, scanning the room and every exit, every corner, his expression sharpening into careful calculation. When Eno reappeared on the sofa, a slow, rhythmic applause filled the room. Voldemort clapped too, eyes wide with genuine astonishment. Incredible, truly incredible. Your excellence exceeds my expectations. Eno did not reply. He reached into his pockets and set a few items on the coffee table, 3 gems and another die. Unlike the irregular polyhedral die he'd first produced, this one was a regular wooden cube, 6-sided, with the numbers 1 through 6 carved clearly into its faces. All of these things had come from his pocket, of course, but there was a reason he'd returned to the sanctuary before showing them. Magic could bind a phoenix, a house elf, even the Blue Lantern. It could not touch the sanctuary's uniqueness. The deliberate display mattered. Eno preferred Voldemort's current look of sober doubt to the confident grin he'd arrived with. With respect, my lord, Eno said, voice steady. I cannot take you to that place. It is not possible, but there are items here that can be exchanged. 359. The oncoming killing curse, a confrontation in midair. Hogsmeade was its usual picture of Christmas, quiet and blanketed in snow. But today something felt wrong. It had been snowing steadily since noon, the wind and flakes piling white on every rooftop and tree. Inside a small cottage, however, the air was unnervingly calm. Perhaps it was because of his earlier disappearance or some other reason, but Voldemort did not explode in rage when Eno refused him a second time. He sat on the sofa, idly turning over the gems and dice on the table, a faint disappointment in his voice. You won't come? Tell me why? Eno answered calmly, eyes fixed on Voldemort's. For a long moment, neither spoke. Going means death, Eno said. Honestly, I don't want to do that. It's not worth it. Voldemort reached up to rub his brow with a single finger, as if weighing the words. I believe you, he said slowly, but this worries me. Is it only death? Is there no solution? I don't know, Eno admitted, shaking his head. For now, it's a dead end. If I weren't thinking of your nature, I would have taken you with me. Voldemort laughed, surprised, dry. A true Slytherin, he said, then his tone sharpened. You say you don't know. Does that mean there might still be a way? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I truly don't know. Eno didn't hide anything. Over the years, he had never fully understood the sanctuary, the acromantula he commanded, the valley that had appeared, or even the Phoenix Fida he controlled. Future changes were unknown to him. And besides, lying to men like Voldemort or Dumbledore was pointless. Not because of legilimency alone, but because if you could deceive them once, they would eventually see through you. Unless the sanctuary let him leave this world entirely, deceit would be both naive and dangerous. Voldemort listened and nodded. I trust my instincts, he said. They tell me you're not lying. He sat straighter, considered, and then added, "But you must be worthy of my trust." At that, an invisible pressure rolled out from him, so intense the fire in the hearth flickered as if it might die. Eno felt it like a word in his head. Ocean. The ocean that seemed calm, but could unleash storm and surge without warning. Eno did not hesitate. The shadow beneath his feet boiled like ink and rushed outward in a black river, filling the room. From the mist rose countless shadow-formed soldiers, bony figures in tattered armor, gripping spears, swords, shortbows, apparitions of the abandoned, cursed mountain folk from another world, brought into the wizarding world for the first time. Avada Kedavra, Voldemort spat. A deadly green jet lanced from his wand. It sliced through several of the shadow soldiers, sending green light through them. The beams did not seem to kill the ink-made troops, but nothing stopped the curse itself. Eno saw the green streak whip toward where he had been standing, and then he was gone, having vanished from that spot to avoid the blast. Voldemort felt a brief, strange relief when the killing curse missed. He had come here for the rules inscribed on the die, not to spill blood. The sudden violent display had been a test, a demonstration of power, much like the opponent's quick disappearances. Still, the black mist and the aggressive show of force pricked at his temper, making him use the magic he knew instinctively. Seeing Eno dodge, he forced himself to stop. He did not want to do anything he would later regret. But intention and outcome are not the same. Eno was furious. The killing curse had brushed past him. He had felt the aura of death in that beam. For the first time, he had come so close to dying, and he had been unarmed, without the dice. Gripping the life-saving dice in his hand, he left the sanctuary. His body reappeared in the cottage. Outside, Hogsmeade's Christmas quiet had already been broken. A biting, shrill wind rushed across the village, and snow like feathers blurred everything. Daylight was suddenly smeared into dusk as a vast, choking black smoke rolled across the sky. From that smoke poured countless skeletal soldiers, medieval, armored, weapons raised, faces twisted into feral snarls. No one had ever mapped Hogsmeade perfectly, but everyone knew many wizards gathered here at this season. A single afternoon could hold an enormous portion of England's magical community. In that instant, every wizard and student in Hogsmeade looked upward. About 100 feet above the square, two figures hung in midair as if floating without support. At that distance, roughly 30 meters, everyone could plainly see them with the naked eye. Eno, he's returned. Swinburne. Voldemort. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hogwarts students recognized Eno. Many of the adult wizards recognized the man who had once shrouded England in terror. Phones and enchanted mirrors were raised as one. Mad-Eye Moody reacted fastest. He drew his wand without hesitation and yelled, "Everyone, now, run to Hogwarts! Tell Professor McGonagall to activate the wards." He also produced a coin, crudely stamped with the mark of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, an attempt to look official. His shout snapped many students out of stunned curiosity. Ravenclaws and others began to flee toward the castle, but a number of students, especially Slytherins, still craned their necks upward. Above, Professor McGonagall was already speeding toward Hogsmeade on her broom, flanked by two others. Professor Phileas Flitwick, head of Ravenclaw and former international dueling champion, and Madame Maxime of Beauxbatons on a lumbering Abraxon. McGonagall could see the two wizards facing off and the terrified students below. "Phileas, take charge of getting the students to safety," she ordered as they drew near. The tension hung in the air like the black smoke. Two powerful wizards faced each other over the village while an army of skeletal soldiers swarmed down, and hundreds of witches and wizards looked up, uncertain whether to run or watch the confrontation unfold. Explanation: Killing Curse, Avada Kedavra. The Killing Curse is the first and most terrible of the unforgivable curses. When cast, a blinding green bolt issues from the wand and upon striking brings instantaneous death, painless and without physical marks. It is a merciless dark spell. Anyone who uses it on another human and is caught by the Ministry faces a life sentence in Azkaban. The curse is generally unstoppable by ordinary defensive charms. A shield charm, for instance, will not stop it. 360. The power of ice magic. On the path to Hogsmeade, Professor McGonagall's face went rigid the moment she saw the figure hovering ahead. She would never forget that silhouette in midair, the single person responsible for more than a decade of darkness and terror across the British Isles. "Olim, you go down with Phileas. I can handle Eno myself," she snapped, turning to Madame Maxime. The Beauxbatons principal was a foreign dignitary. McGonagall could not risk leaving her exposed. She had assumed this was merely a malicious incident, but the scene unfolding before her made that impossible. Still, there were countless students in Hogsmeade who had not evacuated. After giving the order, McGonagall set her jaw and flew toward Hogsmeade alone. As she approached, the snow that had been falling abruptly froze in midair. Not a cessation of snowfall, but a suspension. Flakes across the area, even above Hogwarts, hung motionless, then began to turn, one feather-like flake after another, slowly rotating clockwise, as if guided by an invisible hand. Everyone in Hogsmeade who could see the sky, professors included, witnessed the same impossible sight. Eno hovered aloft like a god of winter, surrounded by swirling snow that darkened the sky. The falling flakes gathered into a white curtain that surged and condensed into a blizzard. And then, as if drawn from that blizzard, the snowflakes transformed. They were no longer ordinary flakes, but pure white billywigs, countless inch-long, stinging insects forming a seething ocean. Higher in the sky, the boggart's black mist took form like a storm cloud. From it poured the cursed mountain folk. Hundreds of archers drew their bows, while scores of other mountain creatures, spearmen, swordsmen, the undead, swooped down like ghosts. Eno held nothing back. The brush with death had forced him to unleash everything he had. He kept his wits, though. He did not let the boggart's black mist descend onto Hogsmeade, and he did not summon Fide, since so many witches and wizards were below and visible. The billywigs and the mountain folk were his disposable forces, summoned, expendable, and effectively inexhaustible. Opposite him, Lord Voldemort raised his wand. Protego, Bombarda. Calm and precise, Voldemort used the most fitting magic. The exploding charm, always underestimated, was delivered in full force. From his wand, a dazzling scarlet beam, as thick as an arm, tore across the sky like lightning. It struck the white sea of insects, and at first contact, drove through them like a red-hot skewer, plunging into soft cheese, burning and melting with ease. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a delay that made many hold their breath, a thunderous series of booms rolled through the air. The explosions were so powerful that wizards below felt the ground shudder. Many people instinctively began to retreat, but a curious number of them, still mounted on broomsticks, kept a hand on small 3-inch viewing mirrors, lenses trained steadily on the duel above. That they filmed the catastrophe even as it shook them to their bones felt oddly like muggles recording an earthquake on their devices. The explosions tore apart nearly half the sea of billywigs. The mountain folk took losses as well. It hardly mattered. The billywigs had been condensed from snow and could be replenished at once. The mountain folk had been formed from the boggart's black mist. Both were consumable, conjured forces. Eno yelled, "Winter is coming," and struck his wand again. This time he did not go nonverbal. He gripped the Elder Wand and fully unleashed the second magic of his ice and snow inheritance. The sky above Hogsmeade and Hogwarts opened and dumped a torrent of snow. A blizzard, violent and suffocating, poured down as if the heavens themselves were collapsing into white. Wind and flakes mingled into a blinding wall. Within moments, the horizon vanished in a vast sea of white. The billywigs that had been blasted apart reformed instantly, swollen and multiplied as if filled with some growth drought. The insect sea expanded more than tenfold, howling and surging anew toward Voldemort. "Frost shot!" Eno cried, and unleashed the first magic of his inheritance. He had once nearly abandoned this almost physical attack after learning Sectum Sempra, but now he returned to it. In this environment, he could do far more than condense 3 or 5 arrows. Behind him, thousands, 10,000, pale blue ice arrows condensed and loosed in a single, unending volley. Arrow after arrow fired like a continuous hail of bullets. Each time one left his hand, the next materialized, a rhythm that, paired with the endless sea of insects, felt like ants swarming a dragon. Even as the attack formed a closed loop, Eno did not relax. The methods Voldemort had used in the hut had left a chill in him. The killing curse had torn through space and arrived with barely a motion of Voldemort's hand. If not for the sanctuary's peculiar protections, that curse might well have finished him. When he thought of the divination dice Voldemort had produced and the polite pretense that had been followed by a direct killing curse, his fear turned to a cold, concentrated fury. Sectum sempra! Sectum sempra! He cried, shaping the cutting curse again and again. Using the boggart to shift his posture in midair, he sent the invisible slashes toward Voldemort from unexpected angles, keeping the Dark Lord occupied. His plan was simple: overwhelm with endless, continuous attacks and deny Voldemort the time to unleash his most lethal spells. No matter how powerful a spell was, it was useless if there was no moment to cast it.